This is Dan Henk with the Skull Session podcast, and today we have Jeff Strand, who's a very well-known horror art author, and he's going to talk a little bit about what his latest project is, what he's working on, and how he gets to where he's going.
Hello.
What's our news, sir?
Hello, I'm Jeff Strand, and this is take 2. So we had our brilliant conversation, life-changing, that didn't record. I think our friendship deepened. I think, it was magical, and I hope we can recapture the magic this time.
It was a great session. Unfortunately, it didn't make it on tape.
So the people watching this, you missed out on really a legendary podcast. This will be, a tiny fraction of how amazing the lost conversation was, but it is out in the nether. So
it's kind of the way of the world.
Yeah, but it's a tragedy, but we'll put on our brave face and move on.
All right, Jeff. So tell us who you are and what you're working on now, if you don't already know who he is.
I am Jeff Strand, Bram Stoker winning award author as of this year after a long losing streak. I write mostly horror comedy, sometimes not as much comedy, and sometimes I veer completely away from horror. So I'm kind of all over the place, but if I'm forced to, define yourself in one sentence, it's like I write horror novels with lots of humor. So that's mostly what I'm known for. I have 2 books that are done but not published yet. I did my first novelization, which is Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. So a lot of other authors doing novelizations do brand new movies. And I went back to 1978 through Encyclopocalypse Publications and did just a completely insane novelization of Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. That will be out April 2023. And going 1 year beyond that, even though the book is done, I have a middle grade horror novel called It Watches in the Dark, which is about a giant possessed scarecrow terrorizing a village. And that will be out from Source Books, but not until April 2024. So there's a nice long wait on that one. What I'm working on right now, it has a tentative title, but the title will probably change, so I won't share it quite yet. And it's a horror thriller, basically about a guy who finds out that his co-worker's husband is a brutal serial killer and decides to intervene and makes things much worse. So that I'm not that far into it. It should be out fairly soon because so my recent stuff has been traditionally published, but I also love self-publishing. Because this one will be self-published, it'll be out a lot sooner than the other ones that have a much longer delay between me turning them in and they coming out.
Man, where can people find this stuff? It's on Amazon?
Yeah, all my stuff is on Amazon. If you go to www.jeffstrand.com, it's got links to everything, but you can also just pop in my name on Amazon and it will bring up the whole collection.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, everybody check stuff out. So let's scroll way back in what got you started in this? Like, what were you doing and you made the move? Because I know you told me that you were doing something, and then as the author thing really started to take off for you, then you devoted all your time to that, right?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to be, an author like forever. I can't go back to a time when I didn't want to be a writer. But my path to quote unquote success was very slow. It was just tiny little steps, a little bit better each year, which over 25 years looked pretty good. But yeah, I did insurance work, not selling insurance, but handling payments and that kind of stuff. Very complicated number related problem solving, which didn't take up any creative energy. It took a lot of an analytical energy, but it didn't hog up creative energy. So I didn't come home thinking, oh, I can't write. I'd come home tired, but I wouldn't come home like drained of creativity. So I did that, that paid the bills up until I think about 2015. So I had done that job for close to 20 years. And, it wasn't the kind of work I wanted to do, but on the 1st and 15th of every month, a paycheck was deposited into my bank account and it had insurance and, it was steady work. So at first I wasn't making anything with my writing. I would I started in e-publishing as far back as e-publishing goes, and back then no one was buying ebooks. So it was a very, very slow upward crawl until I started to hit a point where I was like, I think if I had those 40 to 50 hours a week to work on books, I could make it happen. And eventually in, about 7 years ago, I said, all right, I'm going to do it. And it worked out. So now I am.
Did you say that right around the time that you kind of went to more traditional publishing, ebooks really took off?
Yep. That's what happened. It was when I was e-published, everyone hated ebooks. And then by the time I had a full mass market release in bookstores everywhere, people liked ebooks. It's like, well, that's not fair. Now I have what everyone considers a real book, but they also consider Kindle books real books. So that,
right.
Damn it. But so yeah, the world.
Do your quote real books sell better as Kindle books?
Excuse me?
Do your quote real books sell better as Kindle books?
Yes. Yep. My books, not my young adult. Weirdly, my young adult books, which you would think would be, the kids are all into the digital stuff. My young adult stuff sells way, way better in paperback. But my adult books are not overwhelmingly anymore, but pretty much the majority are the digital sales, which is kind of shocking.
I don't know. Like when I was a little kid, like you like tactile stuff in front of you. It's a little bit harder to see with the cold computer screen. So maybe that's it. I don't know.
Could be, or if they're going to read a book, they want to read a paperback. If they're going to use a device, they want to be texting or TikToking or whatever the fangled kids do these days.
Do you do illustrations in your child books?
No, they're young adults, so they're just like regular novels. And the middle grade one won't have illustrations either. They're not picture books. They're just straightforward novels for a younger audience.
I think we talked a little bit. Like I said, mainly what I didn't like about young adult books is it feels like they kind of dumbed it down. And you said you don't do that.
Yeah, a lot of authors don't. There was a time when maybe young adult was like, the same stuff you'd get for adults, but with a smaller vocabulary. And it's really not like that, especially YA horror. YA horror is as dark and twisted as adult stuff. It's, the young adult of today is way, way different from the young adult when I was a young adult. So, it's not that anything is dumbed down. It's that the main character is a young adult and it's from their perspective. So to differentiate, my novel Autumn Bleeds into Winter, the main character is a 14-year-old boy, but that's coming of age. That's not young adult because it's not told from the perspective of a 14-year-old boy. It's told from the perspective of him as an adult looking back at his youth. So it's like me thinking back to when I was 14. It's not a 14-year-old in the moment, whereas young adult is the 14-year-old in the moment. So that's kind of the difference, is that you're, focusing on the kid characters instead of adult characters. And it is when they were kids, not looking back at their youth fondly with nostalgia.
So is it kind of more like
you can be as demented as you want,
but it's kind of more like seeing through their eyes. They're talking about their perspective of that scene, and that makes it a little bit more young adult. Okay. Right. Yeah, that's nice.
The crucial element is that the main characters are young adults. You're seeing it from the perspective of a young adult. It doesn't have to be first person, but it has to be young adult. It's not looking back at your youth. It is in your youth.
Did you, in the beginning, play around a little bit with where exactly you wanted to go? Whether you wanted to go more for a certain market or more for a certain, like a sort of genre or whatever?
In the really early days, I did, because I wanted to be a comedy writer. So I sort of bounced around. So I did a romantic comedy and a mainstream comedy and a fantasy comedy and a mystery comedy. And I always liked horror, and I'd written some horror stuff, but it was my book, Grave Robbers 1, No Experience Necessary, was not intended to be a horror novel. It was intended to be a, private investigator mystery series. And the first book in the series is actually a legitimate whodunit. But it was also really dark and twisted. And when the book came out, everyone called it a horror novel. Like, I thought it was a mystery, but people said, no, this is a horror novel. I'm like, good, because I love horror. So with the second book, I dropped the whole whodunit mystery element and just went pure horror thriller. And that's what continued for the rest of the series. And I kind of hit a point where I said, all right, I need to, narrow my focus a little bit. So I guess I'm a horror writer. And some of my stuff is technically a thriller. Books like My Pretties, that's, you could call it horror, or you could call it a really dark thriller. And then every once in a while, I completely veer away from the genre, where I did Kumquat, which is a romantic comedy. I did Bang Up, which is a smut comedy, no horror whatsoever. My young adult books are humor books. They're sometimes horror adjacent, a couple of them, but they're not horror novels. They're comedy novels. So I've done some stuff that veers, but the majority of my work, and I define myself as a horror writer. I go to horror conventions. If you see me at a convention, it'll be Killer Con or Stoker Con or Nikon or Scares That Care or something like that. I'm not at mystery conventions or romance conventions or stuff like that. I pretty much
Are there romantic conventions?
Nope. Like if you look at my shirt, I'm wearing a Killer Con shirt. I'm
Yeah,
not wearing
nice. Yeah,
a
yeah.
romantic time shirt. So I define myself as a horror novel, even though I'm not, completely loyal to the genre, and sometimes I veer away. But for the most part, I'm a horror novel, and I'm happy to be a horror novel and not looking to break out of that.
Are you kind of well known within whatever genre that you're premiering in at that time? Like if it's a child book or a young adult book, is like, oh, another one by Jeff Strand. He's the guy who does this kind of stuff. And then when you do horror stuff, it's like, oh, another book by Jeff Strand. He's the guy who does these crazy horror books.
No, completely unknown. Now, because I did 5 young adult books.
Mm-hmm.
So by the 5th one, it was, from the author of I Have a Bad Feeling About This. But when my first one, A Bad Day for Voodoo, came out, it was almost like my first novel.
Okay.
No kids knew who I was.
Okay.
No one reading that book. None of the librarians getting in school libraries had any idea who it was. So it was kind of a slow build with those. Same thing with Kumquat, which I completely stand by it. It's one of my favorites of my own books, but it's not a horror novel by any stretch of the imagination. And nobody who would read a book like Kumquat had any idea who I was. So when you read the reviews, it's basically my horror fans taking a chance on it. So, the first wave of Kumquat reviews were all a horror author doing a romance novel. What? So it didn't work because the official target audience for Kumquat wasn't finding it. So I was basically getting, the horror readers who enjoyed my stuff to the point where they would read a non-horror book.
Right.
So when I veer from horror, no one has any idea who I am. So.
Well, if you had a preference that you had to stick with, would you pick one over the other? Like, is it part of it a financial motivation, or is it you just like to be diverse?
I like to be diverse. The financial motivation brings me back to horror because, I do this full time. My only source of income is writing, which means that, I have to write stuff that sells. I can't just say I write whatever I want, whenever I want. I do have to keep an eye on the market. So I basically have to earn the right to veer outside of horror. Because if I do a straightforward horror novel, I know it's going to sell at a certain level that will keep me from crawling back to a day job. But a book like Bang Up, which doesn't have any horror in it, that was a risk, and it was a risk that failed. And if I were counting on Bang Up to pay my rent and buy groceries, I would have been in deep duty. So I can't do 2 of those in a row. I can do one, and then I have to, rush back and do another horror novel, which is not, it's not, I'm boxed into horror because you can do anything with horror. I've got Blister is it's a horror novel. It sold extremely well, but it's a, demented romance novel along with being a horror novel, whereas Sick House is, just in your face splattery horror. I've got books that are just, Benjamin's Parasite is just full on comedic, gross out body horror. Autumn Bleeds into Winter is a more subtle, suspenseful coming of age horror. So you can do anything you want in the horror genre. So I don't feel locked in. I like to also every once in a while leap outside of it because I like to go more heavily comedic sometimes, but I will always come back to horror, both to pay the bills and both because I love it. I'm not ever thinking, man, if I could just get out of this horror field, I'd be so happy. I love horror. It's what I read. It's kind of movies I watch. So I'm all in on it. Well, not all in on it because I have fear from it, but I will always come back to it quite happily.
Is there a type of horror that you prefer, like cosmic horror, or slasher horror, or zombie horror, or creature like Frankenstein or pumpkin-headed horror?
Not in terms of subject matter, in terms of tone. I tend to be more in your face type stuff. So when
Okay.
it's the quiet horror, I appreciate the skill in, he conveys a feeling of dread by the moonlight glistening off the dew on a leaf. That I appreciate the skill to do that. That's not really what I read, and I can't write that. I've tried quiet horror. It doesn't work for me. So that I have
Well, but
written,
they set the mood
right.
slowly. Yeah.
I've tried that. It doesn't really work for me. I'm not It's rare that I go into full on extreme horror. Now I've won the Splatterpunk award twice. So I play around in the Splatterpunk, you know, playbox, not playbox, sandbox. So I hang with the Splatterpunk crew. I've done my share of Splatterpunk stuff. I don't generally go as far as them. You know, I love reading Wrath James White. I would never write a Wrath James White novel that is just, full on in your face extreme horror. I tend to pull back a little bit more, but I'm definitely loud horror over quiet horror. And that's both what I read and what I write. I'm not a big subtle person.
I've noticed, I haven't seen it from you as much, but I've seen it. Well, I haven't seen it from you at all. But some people, when they do horror, it's like as much as they can, they just go out to shock you. And it seems like the importance isn't the story. It's like how shocking it is. Like a Serbian film. I don't know if you saw a Serbian film. I thought it was fucking horrible. I mean, it's, yeah, I guess it's horror, but it's more like, really? That's what I felt.
Yeah, that's not, I'm not saying I don't appreciate that. Like Edward Lee, the big head, I thoroughly enjoyed the big head. The big head is just, oh, you thought that was gross. How about this? Oh, you
Yeah.
thought that was gross. How about this? So I'm not, I would never read Edward Lee. I'm a big Edward Lee fan. I enjoy his stuff. Not what I write. I'm
Well,
not
I guess it depends on who does it and how skilled they
right.
are at doing that.
Right. I don't have the skill to, you know, do one gross out after another and just you thought that was the most disgusting thing you've ever read. Well, here's something that takes it even further. I'm not trying for that. I write messy stuff. I'm not ashamed of writing gross outs, but I'm not. My point is not this is the most vile, fucked up book you've ever read. I'm just trying to be entertaining. I'm trying to tell a good story, and I'm wherever the line is, my line is, if the line of decency is here, I'm up here, but the extreme horror people are up here, and I'm a little bit
Oh, okay, yeah.
that, but I'm above the line of common good taste. So
Well, like I don't think, like for instance with myself, I don't think that the kind of like the graphic scenes are gross out scenes, but I notice that non-horror people when they read it, they're like, oh my god, I can't believe you went so far. It's like, really?
yeah.
This is nothing. I don't know if you experienced that.
Sometimes, yeah, because of the humor, not so much now. Now I'm pretty firmly entrenched in horror. When I first started, there was more variety in what I'd published, and I had a lot more non-horror readers reading my stuff. So they would read something like Grave Robbers Wanted No Experience Necessary. They'd like it for the story, they'd like it for the characters, but the gorier moments was like, oh, that's the grossest thing ever written. It's really not. It's not even as bad as Stephen King. But
It's like you really haven't read a lot of horror if you think that's the grossest thing you've ever
right.
experienced.
Yeah, I'm not there to push boundaries. I'm there to be as entertaining as possible. But I'm, in my latest book, a guy gets stabbed in the throat, and it's not done as quiet horror. There's spurting blood and all that. So I want it to be messy, but my job is not to describe, spend 2 pages describing the blood as it cascades out his throat. it's bloody. I say that blood was spurting, but I'm not gonna just get it in your face and it's in your hair and it's the most horrible thing you've
If you
ever
go
read.
with that purple prose, we
Right.
describe everything. Yeah.
I'm pretty to the point. It's not pretentious work at all. I don't mind throwing some blood at the reader.
Okay, so let's shift tone a little bit, because you mentioned Stephen King, and we talked about this, in our lost prior conversation, but about the way that you write, because like Stephen King is kind of an advocate of you sit down in front of a typewriter and you put in like 5 hours of typing. It doesn't matter whether it's crap, whatever, just make sure you get it on the page. I don't think like that. I think you told me you don't think like that. What's your approach?
I'm not disciplined enough to do that. Now I'm trying, I even though I've been doing this for a long time and I'm not young by any stretch of the imagination, I still try different things. And a lot of what I've been working on recently is behind the scenes stuff that's hogging up a bunch of my time that I'm not allowed to talk about. And it has kind of cut into my writing a self-published horror novel time.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm currently, because we're recording this mid-December, which means that a lot of Hollywood is on break. So it's like, hey, I've got about 3 weeks where I don't have to deal with the other stuff. This would be a good time to get, as much done on a novel as I can. So I've been trying for a pretty strict word count goal every day, where it's like when I hit the word count goal, I can quit for the day, but I don't quit until I do that. Overall, I'm not quite that disciplined. I would like to be, but I'm not. It's kind of how close am I to the deadline, or how close am I to when I need to get this book done because my bank account is draining. But I'm not really a believer in, at this point of my career, I'm not a believer in just get some writing done, whether it's bad or not. Even if it's garbage, you can always go back and rewrite. I If it's bad, I want to fix it now. I don't just get the first draft done, which is not the same advice that I give new writers. When I'm talking to new writers, I say, just get it done. Prove that you can finish something. Bad writing is better than no writing. It's all about practice. At this point now, for me, having published over 50 books, I don't need the bad writing to prove that I can do the good writing. So I'm more methodical. I'm not big on, I'll fix it later. I'm kind of, no, I'll fix it now. So I don't generally move forward in my story until I'm happy with what I've got now. So if there's a plot hole, I'm going to fix the plot hole now and not later. So I don't really have, on an ongoing basis. I know at one point, Stephen King, I don't know how accurate this is, but he said he writes 6 pages a day every day, except for Christmas and his birthday. I don't know if that's true or not, but I'm not like, I think Joe Lansdale, it's like I write 3 hours a day every day, and however many words I get done in those 3 hours are what I do. So some authors do that. I'm not quite organized enough to do that, but I try to, at least work every day. Whether it's a really productive day or not productive day, I try to, I'm not spending my days watching Netflix or goofing off. I am in front of the keyboard trying to get stuff done.
Are there any recommendations on Netflix you want to throw out?
Well, I just finished watching Dead to Me.
Okay.
Sort of a dark comedy thriller series. The first season is great. The second season keeps up the humor and the characters that you really like. As a thriller, it kind of falls apart. They start making things too easy on the characters. There are too many fake moments where you think they're in trouble. It's like, oh, they're screwed now. Just kidding. The cop wasn't really pulling them over because of the body in their trunk. The cop was pulling them over because of a tail light, and sort of that thing over and over and over. So from characters we enjoy spending time with, it really works. By the second and third season, the thriller part has fallen apart. They needed to study Breaking Bad, where the crises are always real. Like, right, is always screwed. If a cop shows up, he needs to really work to get out of that, instead of just, I was only here to drop off a coffee or whatever.
Yeah, so, right.
That's the one that comes to mind. So it's definitely worth watching, but it doesn't work as well as a thriller.
Was it called Dead to Me?
Dead to Me. Christina Applegate and another actress who, if I was rude and picked up my phone, I could pull up her name, but I won't do that during the recording of this podcast. But
Have you watched Cabinet of Curiosities, the Del
I've
Toro thing?
seen one episode of it. I think the one I saw was The Autopsy. It was really
Yeah.
good, but I haven't actually.
Autopsy is a good episode, but there's some great ones there. I definitely recommend that one. I like all the time. I'm recommending it to people. But all right, so let's go back to the when you're writing stuff and you reach a blockade. What do you do? How do you approach that? Like I know that I
I
just leave and I like I'll do like a bike ride or something and try and think of, and by the end of it I'll have come up with some ideas. But that's my approach. What's your
That's
approach?
basically my approach to except replacing a bicycle for a walk.
Okay.
For me, that's the easiest thing to do is to just say, okay, my hero is screwed. I have to get him out of this. I don't want him to die on page 50. So what am I going to do? And then I just sort of go for a walk and brainstorm. And usually I can figure something out. Not always the same day. Sometimes I'll have to put it aside.
Hmm.
But, I never really have that issue where it's like I'm so stuck that I just have to walk away from it and then I never come back. I'll, usually I can figure it out that same day. Sometimes it involves backtracking where it's like, okay, I need to cheat. I need to have him with a knife strapped to his leg or something like that, where I have to go back and set up the way he gets out of this mess. So sometimes there's, rewriting involved, but generally it's just go for a walk.
Okay.
Sometimes I'll have if I have more than one project going at the same time, I'll just switch to another one until I come up with a solution for the other one. But generally, just step away from it. I don't sit at my computer just like, why can't I get him out of this? It's step away from the computer and then think about it. And then in a less stressful environment, the ideas will come to me.
Well, I find too that I write a lot of notes to come with ideas. I'm like, whether I use this or not for this story, this is a great idea. So I try to save all those. Do you do the same thing?
Not anymore. I used to. What would happen is that I would, get I did a lot of screenplays when I first started. And so I would say, the screenplay isn't really working, but I've got all these great lines, I've got all these great ideas. So I just keep a file of ideas. And then I would realize that I was like trying to shoehorn in, this line is so funny that I can't waste it. So I would put the line in and maybe it didn't necessarily belong in there. And you'll see that in a couple of my earliest books where I'm trying to squeeze in stuff because I don't want to waste it from previous projects.
Like cool elements, it might not
Like
necessarily
cool
flow.
moments where it's like,
Yeah.
that is so, I have to do that. Oh,
Right.
that character trait is great. I can't waste that. Oh, that line is a delight. That's a brilliant one line that needs to go somewhere. And so you can kind of see myself not wanting to waste ideas. And it was what I would consider a legitimate weakness in my work of that era. So I basically quit doing that. I don't have an ideas folder anymore. I have a folder of premises where it's like, okay, here's a good idea for a book. I'm going to write this down so I don't forget it.
Okay.
But in terms of lines or character traits or anything like that, I don't keep those. I try to just use them as I think of them for a current project, because otherwise I found that I was trying not to waste stuff and putting stuff where it doesn't belong instead of just going with, what fits within a certain project. So I used to do that, but I don't do that anymore.
I find that sometimes like I'll come up with a great idea halfway through a book and then I have to go back and I have to rewrite stuff so that it makes more sense.
Mhm.
Do you do the same thing?
Sometimes, yeah, either I'll decide, well, it's too inconsistent with what I've done before, or you just go back and then sort of bury the clues, which I love the idea of serialized books. I would love to do a serialized thing, but I cheat a lot, not cheat, but a lot of times I'll go back and set stuff up. And so it's, in a serialized book, you can't really do that. So
Right.
you're like, well, you have to really commit to what you're doing. So, but yeah, I always, okay, I need to set up this thing in chapter 2 that's going to become important in chapter 17, but I don't set it up until I'm at chapter 17, realizing it needs to be important.
Okay. I remember it was a little bit of surprise. We talked about like first person versus third person and so on. And a lot of people seem very anti first person. And like, some of my favorite authors like Lovecraft were all first person. And yeah, Lovecraft got a little floored with prose, but he has some great ideas. And I like his like the immediacy of it. And that's obviously the whole like draw of first person is the immediacy of it. I think you said that you like first person, and like I said, there's some people that so dislike it they're like, don't even submit to my magazine if it's in first person.
Yeah, I
Um,
love first person. If I had to pick one or the other, I would pick first person. My current book's in first person. I'd mix it up a bit. If I did a count, I would say it's probably pretty evenly divided between first person and third person. It really, for me, depends on what the story requires. So, this current book, you really need to understand why the main character is doing this. And it's a story that can be told just following our hero. So, first person makes sense. If it's something, my pretties couldn't be told in first person because I have two major characters. They're not there the whole time. And you need to be, you need to know what the killer is doing while our heroes aren't, while you're not following them. So my pretties could never be done in first person because you need those other perspectives. So it's really just book by book what makes the most sense for that particular story. A lot of times, if it's more action oriented, it needs to be third person because you need to sort of bounce around between the characters. If it's more suspense oriented, more character based, then first person works. But I enjoy them both. But given the choice, I like first person more. I think it's more fun to write. It's more natural for me. And it's what I prefer to write, but it's not what I write exclusively.
do you feel that like if you do more of like a quick sort of Twilight Zone, like bunch of twists and turns, but a fairly short episode, it needs to be third person so you can get everything across with an omniscient narrator?
Not necessarily. Like my latest book is called Freaky Briefs, and it's all flash fiction. So most of the stories are between 500 and 750 words. So they're all, 2 to 3 pages, really, really quick. And even there, I sort of bounce between first person and third person. There's no reason 500 word story can't also be first person. I think it just completely depends on the story. If you need to tell it through multiple characters' perspective, or if you need a narrator who knows something that your first person narrator wouldn't, then you go third person. But if you can tell it from the point of view of one character, then first person.
Okay. And I think we talked about how, like I said, I really like old illustrated books like The Shadow and Doc Savage, where they have these little illustrations in the
Right.
corner pages. And you said you don't have that, in your current books, but you liked it. I think that's what you said. Plus,
Yeah, I love
you
that
have a
idea.
wife who's who's
Yeah.
awesome. She's an awesome artist for horror books. Why don't you press her to doing that? Like, hey, what
I
would
should.
really be
I should say,
great?
hey, instead of the cover, could you also do 25
Yeah, that'd be
illustrations?
great.
So yeah, I'll
I'm
I'll,
all
I'll
for
bring
that.
up the idea.
And
25 times as much work. Yeah, no, it's great. Like Stephen King's new book Fairy Tale has that. Every chapter has an illustration, and
oh, that's cool.
it works really well. It's even though the illustrations are sometimes very spoilery, it's still kind of a
Right.
fun technique.
Well, he did some like I'm a big fan of Bernie Wrightson. He died unfortunately not too long ago. But
Oh yeah.
Bernie Wrightson did illustrations for Cycle the Werewolf from him, did illustrations for The Stand from him. He did illustrations for a bunch of stuff from him. I thought they added a lot to it. Like I don't know if you saw any of those, but they were really like dramatic
Yeah.
and you could picture the scene.
Yeah, Cycle the Werewolf, and yeah, Bernie Wrightson's obviously one of the greats. So
Yeah. And I think we talked a little bit about videos too, and you said like you were looking into them, but you hadn't done them yet.
yeah, I can't even say I'm looking into them. It's something that I know I should do. On the list of, you know, TikTok videos are really popular. I should really just, do some funny stuff book related. I have a TikTok account that I have not uploaded a single video to.
Right.
So it's one of those things that is, there's lots of stuff that I think I should be doing. And, I should also be doing keyword optimization for my Amazon listings. And I don't do that either. So it's one of those things. It's not like, yes, as soon as we're done with this interview, I'm going to start my videos.
Right.
It's something I should do. It's something I intend to do, but it's not anything where I have, actually worked out ideas or picked up a camera to actually record anything. It's one of those things that, yeah, I should. There's no reason I shouldn't do TikTok videos. I'd probably, at least be able to be mildly amusing at it, but I haven't actually done it yet.
I think sort of the consensus I've got off of like book trailers and book reviews, like first of all, the show would be like 30 seconds to a minute the longest because people have very short attention spans. And it should grab you right away because otherwise you have no reason to watch it. But I've heard some that are really cool, but they don't do a lot as far as drawing in new sales.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I haven't actually done a study on that. So I'm not sure if people say, oh, he's so entertaining, I should see if he writes books or not. Mine would probably be something funny, just directly related to the book. I did one like back in 2009 with my book Pressure, where I it's why the book Pressure is making the world a better place. And it basically you could work out your aggressions on a copy of the book. And I just destroyed a copy of the book for a video. And it was fairly popular. I don't know that it actually moved any copies of Pressure, but people seem to enjoy it.
Right.
I thought I should do more like that, and then proceeded to not do more like that. So
well, the people who say you should do more like that probably already bought your book. So it's it's not like you're doing anything extra.
Hurt. Unless you go on some racist rant, you're probably not going to lose sales from a TikTok video. But I would have to do a lot more research, do some experimentation, and that's all stuff that I should do. But at least I'm working on new stuff. It's not like, well, I'm so busy that I'm watching Netflix. I'm actually writing books and stuff. So I don't feel too bad, but yeah, at some point I should start the Jeff Strand TikTok channel and just become.
I think you should do the TikTok channel with like the pink tutu on. You'll hold up a book.
And some lip syncing.
That might help sell it. You never know.
Find out.
That might be the next big thing. All of a sudden you're blasted all over media, and I don't know, or maybe not.
This could be the moment. This could be the moment where everything
It could be the breakout moment. All right. Well, do you have you said you have a bunch of secret projects that you're working on, or like so people just have to pay attention to your website to see what you're up to?
Yeah, well, even the website is, it kind of sucks. I like when I write a book, I can talk about it. I don't have to be, I don't have to, I'm working on a book, but you're not going to know what I can choose to do that. Sometimes it's fun to do that, but it's completely my choice on when to reveal information. Whereas this, which it's a TV project, and it's like, I'm not allowed to talk about it. I don't think they would send armed men to my home if I did, but I'm not supposed to talk about it. So
you never know. They might. I don't know if you've seen Black Mirror. It could happen.
Yeah, and it's this isn't like a brand new project where it's like, oh, it's brand new, it's so exciting, I wish I could talk, but soon I will be able to. This is stuff that's been going on for 2 or 3 years, and in some cases with some of the movie stuff, it's been going on even longer. And there's all this cool stuff that I can't talk about, and it's not my choice. If it was my choice, I would tell everything, but I kind of have to shut up about it and just say, no, really, it's cool, but I'm not allowed to tell you. And then at some point, one of these movie things is starting to feel like The Girlfriend Who Lives in Canada sort of thing, where it's like, oh yeah, I've got a girl. She's up in Canada. I'll introduce you someday. It's starting to feel like that because they, the movie and television business moves so slow,
right?
And there are so many hoops to jump through that
until they need it yesterday,
right? When you look back, you cannot believe how long some of these projects have been in progress. And so it starts to feel like I'm just making it up. Like, I keep teasing, there's cool stuff happening, but I can't talk about it. It's starting to feel like I'm just a dirty liar. And I'm sure some people are like, by now you would have said something. But yeah, it is. it is maddening. So there's lots of cool stuff happening that I can't talk about that's hogging up a lot of my time. But, you know, at
Do they
some
press you
point,
at all to change it? They're like, yeah, we love what you did, but why don't you try? And then,
oh, yeah, yep.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's a big part of it. So,
Is some of it kind of frustrating and annoying? Like I know when I did album covers for like bands, and they say, "Yeah, can you move the head just a little bit?" I'm like, "It's an oil painting. It's not digital. I can't just move the head." Like, is it that sort of thing where like they just keep nitpicking little stuff?
the current project I'm working on is not like that. There are definitely widespread changes that come because there are lots of different voices giving input. It hasn't hit the point where I'm like, are you kidding me? The one I'm working on now is very rewarding. I will say that there's a long dead project where I was doing the screenplay, and every draft I would get feedback that was completely the opposite of what I'd been told before. And so it was insanely maddening because I would turn in the script, take into consideration all the notes I'd been given, and then I would get a completely new set of notes that was the opposite of what I'd been told before.
Right.
And then I would make all those changes, and then the next set of feedback, and it was just so yes, I have absolutely experienced that. I'm not experiencing that now, but yes, I've gone through that.
Do you find it's a little bit easier or more fulfilling or whatever to put something out by yourself, to self-publish it, as opposed to have like a big media company that tries to direct your every move?
I'm not sure that it's more fulfilling. I like having total creative control. I like that the book I'm writing now is on my own deadline within the context of writing is my only source of income, so I can't, wait too long. But I can, do whatever I want with the story. I'm not beholden to anyone for that. I enjoy working with editors, so it's not like, every word I write is a masterpiece and I won't have a single word touch. It's basically I trade with the self-published stuff. I have a crew of test readers, so I take their feedback into account. So it's not like I write a flawless manuscript and self-publish it and it goes exactly the way I wrote it. I send it out to multiple people, get their feedback, consider it, but ultimately I'm the final boss. With the traditionally published stuff, the editor has, a degree of power. So I have to sort of explain why, here's why I did it this way, and then sort of explain myself a little bit more. Where in self-publishing, I don't have to justify anything. It's like, I'm the king. I will do the book however I wish. Titles get changed. You don't have full cover approval. But, so there's, from that standpoint, if my book, the self-published stuff, whatever I want to call the book is what the book is called. With traditionally published, the marketing department is doing research. They're surveying 100 people and seeing which of the 5 title choices they gravitate toward. And then it's like, here's your title. It's like, okay, not the one I would have picked, but I guess, the marketing team knows what they're doing. Obviously, the upside is that it's in bookstores. My self-published stuff sometimes shows up in bookstores, but for the most part, it doesn't. Whereas, when It Watches in the Dark comes out, you'll be able to go into any bookstore in the country and there it'll be. And it'll be in libraries. It'll be very, very easy to find. And, they'll be doing marketing. Whereas with self-publishing, I do everything myself. So there are, from an ego standpoint, the traditionally published stuff is better because I go into a bookstore and there it is. There I am on the shelf right next to Peter Straub. And, so you don't get that with the self-published stuff, but with the self-published stuff, there's more control. And so it's even. I like being a hybrid author. I like doing both. So I'm definitely not one of those people who says you must do traditional publishing if you want to be a real author. And I'm not one of those people who says self-publishing is the only way to do it. I like both. I think they both have advantages and they both have disadvantages. So I kind of like sort of being in the middle.
Okay. All right. Well, I have 2 more big questions for you, and then I want to have all your links, so people can check out what we're doing. But the questions are: one, what do you think of agents? Because some people are totally pro agents, some people think it's a waste.
Okay. See, I actually have a chapter devoted to it. I wrote a nonfiction book called The Writing Life, Recollections, Reflections, and a lot of cursing. And I describe my experiences with agents, and I'm the huge disclaimer at the beginning of the chapter and at the end of the chapter is this is my experience.
Okay.
So my experience with agents has been crap. I am not a fan of my own personal agent experiences. I know people who their agent is, their best friend. They owe their whole career to their agent. After I fired my agent, someone who was a friend who was with that same agent was like, is there anything I should know? And I said, no, that my problems are not your problems. I'm not saying everyone should leave. I'm saying this didn't work for me. And the agent then got her an extremely lucrative book deal not too long after that. So
Okay.
I'm not a thumbs down to agents. No writer needs an agent. I will say in my case, agents have sucked.
Okay.
I'm not looking for an agent. I'm sometime you may play this interview back and I'm well, that's how I felt then, but now I love my agent. So,
right.
But at the moment I'm not looking for one. I have a manager for my screenplay stuff, which is a very different type of process. So in that case, I talk to him a lot more than I ever talk to my agent. I'm very satisfied with my manager, but it's a different relationship than it is with an agent. And actually our first call was because I thought I needed an agent because it was like, there's a deal on the table. I don't know completely how these movie deals work. I can negotiate my own book contract, but I'm not as comfortable with movie stuff. So I need an agent. But this guy was like, well, let me explain to you the difference between an agent and a manager and why you need a manager. And I was like, you're correct. I do need a manager. So now I have a manager who handles most of that kind of stuff. So I'm pro Hollywood screenwriter manager, but I'm anti, for me, book agent. And that's just because my experiences have sucked.
All right. So in the final big question I want to ask is what about editing? Like, do you have a personal editor that you tend to go to? Do you have people that you run it by? What's your process?
I have for my self-published stuff, my traditionally published stuff, it's the standard thing. I'm working directly with an editor. She's going to call me today or tomorrow on the latest draft of the book, and then it goes to copy editors and that kind of. So it's the standard process. With my self-published stuff, I'm actually a very good self-editor. So when I turn in manuscripts, they're very clean. I'm not, filled with typos and continuity errors and stuff. So what I have is a team of beta readers, and it's about 6 people, and I just send them the book, and then they come back and find my mistakes and say, here's, what needs to be clear or whatever. I've been working with most of them for a long time. I've had Todd Clark has been reading my stuff since 2007. He's my oldest test reader, but I've had test readers, easily 10, 12 years each. So I send it out to them, and then they come back with their feedback. And then the hope is that with me turning in a clean manuscript and then having 6 people offer up their feedback, then we've got a pretty good, clean manuscript ready to publish. So that's been my process for all of my self-published stuff. I don't actually pay an editor to do it. I just 6 beta readers plus my natural ability gets the job done for that.
Do you read do you just give them to read, or do you read anything out loud to them, or do you have them read anything out loud to you?
No, I send them. I read out loud to myself. I don't actually read. I whisper out loud just because that's a good way to catch mistakes. So right. I just sit at my, looking like a deranged person, just sort of as I do my final proofread, just to catch those last errors. But I just send them the manuscript, and I don't necessarily send it out to all 6 of them at once. Like sometimes I'll send it kind of like a serialized thing where it's like, okay, here's 3 chapters at a time before I've sent it to the other people, and then I sort of work in that feedback and then Okay, once I've incorporated that feedback, then it goes on to a couple more people, and then I'll incorporate that feedback and then send it on to the next one. So sometimes it's a sort of a tiered process where I'm not sending it to everyone at the same time. When I have a completed manuscript, I'm sort of sometimes getting a head start on the process, but I'm a little
Some of
bit
those beta readers, you like insert their recommendations and then send it back to them.
right. I'll send it to them, and basically, Todd Clark will give his, he'll do typo hunting and continuity hunting. Todd Clark is really good at saying, in chapter 3 you said it was this kind of gun, but in chapter 21 you said it was this kind of gun. Like,
Right.
oh, right. And so he's, I'll take that feedback into account. Generally, he'll say, where he thinks it ranks, in my overall book. Like, yeah, not one of my favorites, or this is your best one yet. So that, which is, if all my beta read, I haven't had this situation. If, I had 6 beta readers saying, maybe not one of your better ones, I would probably go back to the drawing board. But for the most part, I haven't. I'll have, one of the 6 saying, maybe not one of your best works, but the other 5
Right.
have it. So I haven't had a unanimous or majority thumbs down so far. But
Well,
because
it's also subjective, so it's kind of like it might strike one person more than another.
Usually if a book isn't working, I've weeded it out long before it's done.
Right.
I have a file on my computer, a folder on my computer that is, I call it the graveyard of abandoned projects. And those are the ones where, I'm good at self-editing, and I'm good at saying, you know what, this isn't up to your standard. Let's move on to something else. So it doesn't, by the time it gets to the test readers, I fully stand behind it. So.
Okay. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much, Jeff. Thanks for all this looking at your process and information. Tell people how they can see your latest projects and what you're working on.
Jeff Strand has all the latest information. It's got links to my Twitter, which is at Jeff Strand, and I'm on Facebook, Instagram, on TikTok, not doing anything else, but maybe this will be what finally inspires me to start becoming a TikTok star.
I'm telling you, it's the to-do. You have to get the to-do.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks again, Jeff. And thanks for this conversation. And thanks for doing it twice.
Maybe we'll get to do it a third time.